Step aside, ma'am. The executive elevators are reserved for people who actually belong upstairs. The words echoed sharply across the marble lobby of Whitmore Global headquarters, and for a brief moment, every conversation near the reception desk seemed to pause. The man who said it believed he was protecting the image of a billion-dollar corporation. What he didn't know was that within the next few minutes, the entire building would regret the way they treated the quiet woman standing in the beige coat. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Morning sunlight poured through the 60-foot glass walls of Whitmore Global's Manhattan headquarters, casting long reflections across polished white marble floors that gleamed like still water. Executives in tailored navy suits crossed the lobby with hurried confidence, clutching leather portfolios and speaking into wireless headsets about market shares, merger deadlines, and investor expectations. It was acquisition day, the most important morning in the company's history. Financial reporters crowded behind velvet ropes outside the building, while luxury sedans lined the curb beneath silver skyscrapers disappearing into low gray clouds. Every employee inside knew one thing. By noon, Whitmore Global would officially absorb its biggest competitor in a $12 billion merger that would reshape the tech industry. Tension filled the air like static before a thunderstorm. And standing quietly near the center of that chaos was a woman almost nobody noticed. Vivian Whitmore adjusted the sleeve of her simple beige coat and calmly glanced around the massive lobby. At 38 years old, she carried herself with quiet composure, though nothing about her appearance suggested extraordinary wealth or power. Her light brown hair rested neatly over her shoulders, untouched by flashy styling. She wore no visible designer labels, no expensive jewelry beyond a slim silver watch, and her leather tote bag looked worn from years of use. To most people passing by, she appeared to be another assistant arriving early for meetings she wasn't important enough to attend, which was exactly what Damian Mercer assumed the moment he spotted her near the executive elevators. Damian, Whitmore Global's head of operations, was a man who built his career on appearances. His charcoal Italian suit fit perfectly against his broad frame. His polished shoes reflected the marble beneath him, and the sharp tone in his voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling every room he entered. He slowed his pace as his eyes moved over Vivian's modest clothes. Then came the look, that subtle expression wealthy people sometimes gave others when they had already decided their social value within seconds. "Ma'am," Damian said firmly, stepping in front of her path. Service staff and assistants use the elevators on the east side. Vivian looked at him calmly. "I'm actually headed upstairs," she replied softly. Damian gave a short laugh beneath his breath. Nearby employees overheard the exchange and glanced toward her with growing curiosity. "Not using these elevators," Damian said. "Executive access only." Vivian's expression didn't change. "I understand." Her voice remained polite, steady, almost impossibly calm. But Damian mistook her calmness for embarrassment. "Look," he continued, lowering his voice slightly, while still making sure nearby people could hear. "Today isn't the day for confusion. We have board members arriving from London, San Francisco, and Singapore. This floor is restricted." Two young analysts standing near the coffee station exchanged smirks. A receptionist looked down quickly, pretending not to listen. Vivian simply nodded once. "Thank you for letting me know." Damian motioned toward the far hallway. "The service elevators are down that corridor. Someone there can help you find wherever you're supposed to be." For a moment, Vivian glanced toward the towering silver company logo mounted behind the reception desk. Her eyes lingered there quietly, thoughtfully, as though measuring something far larger than the lobby itself. Then she looked back at Damian with the faintest trace of disappointment hidden behind her calm expression. And although nobody in that room realized it yet, the woman they were dismissing had spent the last 3 months purchasing controlling ownership of the very company whose hallways they believed she didn't belong in. The room hadn't gone silent yet, but it would soon. Vivian stepped away from the executive elevators without protest, her soft leather shoes barely making a sound against the polished marble floor. Around her, the towering lobby of Whitmore Global pulsed with restless energy as employees rushed between security checkpoints and reception counters carrying tablets, coffee trays, and stacks of presentation folders. Overhead, enormous digital screens displayed the company logo beside a countdown clock marking the final hours before the acquisition announcement. Every few seconds, another group of executives entered through the revolving glass doors beneath flashes from cameras waiting outside on Fifth Avenue. Yet despite the tension filling the building, Damian Mercer seemed strangely satisfied with himself. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored suit and glanced toward Chloe Bennett, the senior executive assistant standing behind the reception desk. "You see," he muttered quietly, "this is exactly why standards matter." Chloe forced a polite smile, though something about the interaction clearly unsettled her. At 28, she had spent 3 exhausting years climbing through Whitmore Global's competitive corporate hierarchy, and she understood better than most how quickly people judged appearances inside the company. Still, she hesitated before speaking carefully. She did not seem disruptive. Damian scoffed softly. "That is how people slip into restricted events. Confidence." His eyes drifted toward Vivian again. "Today of all days, we cannot afford mistakes." Vivian remained near the center of the lobby, calmly observing everything around her with quiet attention. She watched security guards scanning badges, assistants rehearsing presentations under their breath, and executives straightening ties before entering private conference rooms upstairs. Every expression, every interaction, every subtle shift in tone seemed to register silently behind her composed eyes. To everyone else, she looked like a woman awkwardly waiting for someone important to arrive. In reality, she was studying the culture of the company she was about to control. Near the reception desk, 2 junior associates whispered while pretending to organize folders. "Who even shows up to a merger meeting dressed like that?" one murmured. "Probably delivery staff," the other replied with a quiet laugh. Vivian heard them. She simply lowered her gaze briefly and continued standing there without reaction. Years earlier, comments like those might have hurt her, but success had taught her something valuable. The loudest people in the room were often the least secure. Across the lobby, Damian's phone buzzed sharply. He answered immediately, his posture straightening. "Yes, sir," he said quickly. "Everything is prepared for the board arrival." He listened for a moment before nodding. "Absolutely. The incoming ownership representative has not arrived yet, but security is fully controlled." Vivian almost smiled at those words. Incoming ownership representative. Even now, nobody realized they were speaking about her. The massive silver elevator doors suddenly opened nearby, and several board members stepped out into the lobby speaking in low, urgent voices. Expensive wool coats draped over their arms while assistants followed closely behind, carrying briefing binders embossed with the Whitmore Global insignia. Damian immediately moved toward them with polished professionalism. "Good morning, everyone," he said confidently. "Conference level is secured and ready." One older board member glanced around the lobby distractedly. "Has Ms. Whitmore arrived yet?" Damian shook his head smoothly. "Not yet, sir. We are expecting her shortly." Vivian remained silent, only 30 feet away. Chloe noticed this and shifted uneasily behind the desk. There was something strange about the timing, something she could not quite explain. Her eyes moved from the board members to Vivian standing quietly alone in the beige coat. Then she noticed the silver watch on Vivian's wrist. Simple, elegant, extremely expensive. Chloe's expression changed slightly. Damian, however, noticed nothing. He was too focused on appearances, too confident in his assumptions. "Once the ownership transition is finalized," he continued proudly, "we expect a completely new era for Whitmore Global." Vivian slowly turned her gaze toward him as he spoke. There was no anger in her expression, only disappointment. Because the man praising the company's future had already failed the first test, she came to observe. Nearby, the revolving doors spun once more as cold Manhattan wind swept briefly through the lobby. Several employees instinctively looked toward the entrance. A black SUV had just arrived outside beneath the building awning, followed by another behind it. Security guards immediately straightened. Receptionists exchanged nervous glances. The atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Someone important had arrived. Damian adjusted his tie and prepared his professional smile. He had no idea the next few moments were about to unravel everything he thought he understood about power. The moment the black SUVs stopped beneath the towering glass entrance of Whitmore Global, the atmosphere inside the lobby shifted like pressure before a storm. Security guards immediately adjusted their posture. Receptionists straightened stacks of papers that did not need straightening. Conversations lowered into nervous murmurs. Even the junior analysts near the coffee station suddenly stopped laughing. Damian Mercer glanced toward the entrance with sharp attention, smoothing the front of his suit jacket as though preparing for inspection. That should be the legal delegation, one board member whispered quietly. Through the revolving glass doors stepped 6 individuals dressed in dark tailored coats, followed closely by 2 corporate attorneys carrying silver briefcases. Their pace was calm but purposeful, the kind of movement that made entire rooms instinctively clear a path without being asked. At the center of the group walked an older man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses whose face several executives immediately recognized. Charles Holloway, senior legal advisor to Whitmore Capital Holdings, one of the most respected acquisition attorneys in the country. Damian's confident expression brightened instantly as he stepped forward to greet him. "Mr. Holloway," Damian said with polished enthusiasm, "welcome to Whitmore Global. Conference level is fully prepared." Charles gave a polite nod, though his eyes were already searching the lobby for someone else. "Has Ms. Whitmore arrived?" he asked calmly. Damian smiled professionally. "Not yet, sir. We are expecting her any minute." Charles paused. His eyes slowly drifted past Damian's shoulder toward the center of the marble lobby, toward the quiet woman standing beside the executive elevators in the beige coat. The older attorney stopped walking entirely. One of the board members noticed his expression and followed his gaze. Then another. The energy in the room changed so subtly at first that almost nobody understood what was happening. Vivian remained perfectly still as Charles Holloway approached her directly. His polished shoes echoed softly across the marble floor, while nearby employees watched with growing confusion. Damian frowned slightly and turned to Chloe. "Why is he walking over there?" he whispered. Chloe did not answer. Her stomach had already begun tightening with realization. Charles stopped in front of Vivian and offered a respectful nod that stunned everyone close enough to witness it. "Ms. Whitmore," he said warmly, "I apologize for the delay. Traffic near Midtown was worse than expected." The room went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that arrives when reality suddenly fractures inside people's minds. Damian's confident posture froze completely. One of the receptionists accidentally dropped a pen onto the marble floor, but nobody looked away from Vivian long enough to notice. Vivian gave a small smile. "No problem, Charles. I had time to observe." The way she said the word observe made Chloe's face lose color instantly. Damian blinked once, almost mechanically, as his brain struggled to catch up with what he had just heard. "Ms. Whitmore. Not assistant. Not visitor. Not service staff. Ms. Whitmore. The incoming owner of Whitmore Global. The woman whose signature would finalize the $12 billion acquisition before noon." Behind Charles, several board members immediately straightened with visible nervousness. One stepped forward quickly, extending both hands respectfully. "Welcome, Ms. Whitmore. We have all been waiting upstairs." Vivian shook his hand politely. "Thank you." Damian's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Moments earlier, he had ordered this woman away from the executive elevators in front of employees and board members. Now the entire leadership team was standing before her with visible respect. The contrast hit him like cold air. Chloe lowered her eyes, suddenly unable to look directly at Vivian anymore. Across the lobby, whispers spread rapidly between employees. "That is her. That is Vivian Whitmore. She owns the company? Oh my God." Damian finally forced himself forward, his face pale beneath the bright lobby lights. "Ms. Whitmore," he began carefully, "I sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding earlier. We were simply trying to maintain security protocols." Vivian turned toward him slowly. Her expression remained calm, but there was something almost heartbreaking in the steadiness of her eyes. "Security protocols," she repeated softly. Damian swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." Vivian glanced around the massive marble lobby one more time, taking in the nervous faces, the lowered eyes, the sudden shift in tone that now filled the room. Just minutes ago they saw her as invisible. Now nobody could look away. And that was exactly the problem she came to investigate. No one in the Whitmore Global lobby seemed to know where to look anymore. Just moments earlier, employees had dismissed Vivian Whitmore as an outsider standing in the wrong place. Now the same executives who ignored her presence stood with nervous posture and carefully measured smiles, suddenly aware that every word spoken in the last 20 minutes might carry consequences far beyond embarrassment. Damian Mercer felt the pressure first. It settled heavily behind his chest as he watched. Board members surround Vivian with visible respect. The polished confidence he had carried all morning began cracking beneath the weight of realization. He had not merely disrespected a visitor. He had publicly humiliated the incoming owner of the company. Vivian, however, showed no anger. That unsettled him more than shouting ever could. She simply stood there calmly while Charles Holloway handed her a sleek black portfolio containing acquisition documents. "Everything is prepared upstairs," Charles said carefully. "The final signatures are ready whenever you are." Vivian nodded once before glancing around the lobby again. Her eyes moved slowly across the reception desk, the coffee station, the security checkpoint, and the employees pretending not to stare. The room remained painfully quiet beneath the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. Then Vivian asked a simple question. "How long has this culture existed here?" Several executives exchanged nervous looks. Damian immediately stepped forward. "Ms. Whitmore, I assure you this was an isolated misunderstanding." Vivian turned toward him. "Was it?" Her voice remained soft, but every word landed with uncomfortable precision. Damian forced a controlled smile. Naturally, during high-security events, appearances can sometimes create confusion. The moment he said appearances, Chloe Bennett lowered her eyes. Even some of the board members visibly stiffened at the wording. Vivian noticed all of it. "Appearances," she repeated quietly. Interesting choice of words. Damian's throat tightened. He realized too late that the sentence sounded far worse spoken aloud than it had inside his own mind. Vivian took a few slow steps across the marble floor, her beige coat moving gently as employees instinctively cleared a path around her. "I arrived this morning without security escorts, without announcements, without luxury branding attached to me," she said calmly. "And within minutes, people assumed I did not belong." Nobody answered. The silence itself became an admission. Near the elevators, one young analyst stared at the floor, remembering the jokes he whispered earlier. A receptionist nervously adjusted papers that no longer needed organizing. Even security guards shifted awkwardly beneath the growing tension spreading across the lobby. Damian attempted another recovery. "Ms. Whitmore, please understand, Whitmore Global values professionalism." Vivian stopped walking. Slowly, she turned back toward him. "Professionalism," she said softly, "is not the ability to recognize wealthy people by their clothing." The room went silent again. Damian's face lost color. One board member removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose as though already exhausted by the direction this morning was taking. Vivian continued calmly. "True professionalism is treating every person with dignity before you know what they can offer you." Her words were not loud. They did not need to be. In the stillness of the marble lobby, they carried farther than shouting ever could. Chloe felt heat rise in her face as guilt settled inside her chest. Unlike Damian, she had not openly mocked Vivian, but she also had not stepped in when she should have. And deep down, she understood why. Fear. Fear of hierarchy. Fear of disagreeing with powerful people. Fear of becoming the next person judged in public. Vivian seemed to recognize that conflict immediately when their eyes briefly met. But she said nothing to embarrass her further. Across the lobby, several reporters could now be seen gathering outside the glass entrance, hoping to catch a glimpse of executives before the acquisition announcement. Damian noticed them and grew even more anxious. If this situation became public, his career inside corporate leadership circles could collapse overnight. "Ms. Whitmore," he said carefully, lowering his voice, "perhaps we should continue this discussion privately upstairs." Vivian studied him for several long seconds. Damian could barely maintain eye contact. Finally, she spoke. "No, Mr. Mercer. I think this conversation belongs exactly where it started." The sentence hit harder than anyone expected, because every person in that lobby understood what she truly meant. Public disrespect should not disappear behind closed doors simply because power entered the room. Charles Holloway quietly closed the portfolio in his hands and glanced toward the board members. None of them spoke. They were beginning to understand something important about Vivian Whitmore. She was not there simply to acquire a company. She was there to expose the character hidden beneath its polished image. And for the first time that morning, Damian Mercer realized the acquisition meeting upstairs was no longer the most important event happening inside the building. The tension inside the Whitmore Global lobby no longer felt temporary. It hung in the air heavily now, pressing against every polished surface and every carefully controlled expression. Employees who normally moved through the building with confident efficiency suddenly seemed unsure where to stand or where to look. Nobody wanted to speak first. Nobody wanted to say the wrong thing in front of the woman who now quietly held the future of the entire company in her hands. Vivian Whitmore stood near the center of the marble floor with calm stillness, while Manhattan traffic rolled silently beyond the towering glass walls behind her. The morning sunlight had shifted higher now, casting pale reflections across the silver company logo mounted above the reception desk. Everything about the building projected prestige, control, and perfection. But beneath that polished image, cracks had already begun showing. Damian Mercer felt those cracks widening with every passing second. He could no longer hide behind professional language or carefully rehearsed corporate confidence. Vivian's presence exposed something far more uncomfortable than a security misunderstanding. She exposed character. Damian glanced nervously toward the board members, silently hoping one of them would redirect the situation upstairs before it became even more damaging. But none of them intervened. They understood exactly what was happening now. Vivian had not come merely to complete paperwork. She had come to see the soul of the company before deciding what deserved to survive under her leadership. Charles Holloway adjusted his glasses quietly before speaking with measured caution. "Ms. Whitmore," he said gently, "the acquisition schedule is already delayed by nearly 20 minutes. Vivian nodded slightly, without taking her eyes off the employees gathered around the lobby. "I am aware." Her voice remained calm. "But this may be the more important meeting." Damian swallowed hard. Nearby, Chloe Bennett stood frozen behind the reception desk, replaying the morning repeatedly inside her mind. She remembered the exact moment Vivian first walked through the doors. The beige coat, the worn leather tote, the calm expression, and most painfully, the way nobody had offered basic respect until power entered the room beside her name. Chloe suddenly realized how deeply that truth reached beyond one bad interaction. Whitmore Global rewarded appearances. Expensive watches opened doors faster than kindness. Designer suits earned trust faster than humility. And everyone inside the company had slowly accepted it as normal. Vivian turned slightly toward the reception area. "How long have you worked here?" she asked softly. Chloe blinked in surprise. 3 years, ma'am." Vivian gave a small nod. "And are people always treated according to how important they appear?" The question landed like a spotlight across the lobby. Chloe hesitated carefully. Damian immediately stepped forward before she could answer. "Ms. Whitmore, I assure you our company values every client and employee equally." Vivian looked at him quietly. "Do you?" Her eyes never left his face. Damian felt heat rising beneath his collar. "Of course." Vivian took one slow step closer. "Then why did nobody speak to me with respect until they discovered my title?" Silence. Complete silence. Even the security guards near the entrance lowered their eyes. One junior analyst shifted uncomfortably beside the coffee station, suddenly ashamed of the jokes whispered earlier. Vivian continued calmly. "You saw a simple coat and assumed I belonged downstairs. You saw a quiet woman and assumed she lacked authority. You saw someone without visible status and decided dignity became optional." Damian opened his mouth to respond, but no explanation came. Because deep down, he knew she was right. Across the lobby, the revolving doors turned again as more reporters gathered outside behind barricades, hoping to capture footage of executives arriving for the historic merger announcement. Camera flashes occasionally reflected against the glass entrance like distant lightning. Inside, however, the atmosphere felt entirely different now. The acquisition had become personal. Vivian slowly glanced around the enormous lobby once more. Her expression softened slightly, though disappointment still lingered in her eyes. "Companies do not fail because of bad marketing," she said quietly. "They fail because arrogance slowly replaces humanity." Several board members exchanged uneasy looks. Charles Holloway remained silent beside her, understanding the deeper meaning behind every word. Vivian was testing more than professionalism. She was measuring integrity, and the results so far were not promising. Damien finally lowered his voice. "Ms. Whitmore, I made a mistake." Vivian studied him for a long moment. There was no satisfaction in her face, no cruelty, only calm disappointment. "Yes," she said softly. "But the dangerous part is that you believed you were right when you made it." The room went still again, because everyone standing there understood exactly what she meant. True prejudice rarely announces itself as cruelty. Most of the time, it disguises itself as professionalism, standards, or policy. And inside the polished glass tower of Whitmore Global, that truth had finally been dragged into the light. The silence that followed Vivian Whitmore's words did not break immediately. It settled deeper instead, pressing into every corner of the Whitmore Global lobby like an invisible weight no one could escape. Damien Mercer stood completely still now, his earlier confidence stripped away and replaced by something far more unsettling. The realization that every assumption he had made that morning had collapsed in front of witnesses who would not forget it. Employees who once avoided eye contact were now staring at the floor, at their hands, at anything except the woman who had just exposed how easily respect inside the building had been conditional. Vivian remained composed, her beige coat untouched by the chaos around her, her expression steady but no longer distant. She was no longer observing silently. She was evaluating openly. Charles Holloway took a slow step forward beside her, lowering his voice so only those closest could hear. "The board is ready upstairs whenever you decide," he said carefully. Vivian nodded once. "Then we should not keep them waiting." Her words were simple, but they shifted the entire atmosphere again. Because now the focus was no longer on what had already happened, but on what would happen next. Damien quickly moved forward, desperation now replacing authority in his tone. "Ms. Whitmore, if I may," he began, choosing each word with extreme caution. "I want to personally apologize for earlier. There was a misunderstanding in protocol and identification." Vivian stopped walking. Slowly, she turned her head toward him. "Misunderstanding," she repeated. Damien nodded quickly. "Yes, a failure in communication standards." For a brief moment, no one spoke. Even the ambient noise of the lobby seemed to fade under the weight of her gaze. Vivian studied him carefully, not with anger, but with something far more precise. Analysis. "Mr. Mercer," she said softly, "earlier you said I did not belong in this space." Damien hesitated. "I was referring to security classification, not your identity." Vivian tilted her head slightly. "And if I had not revealed my identity?" The question landed heavily. Damien did not answer immediately, because there was no safe answer. If she had remained anonymous, nothing about their behavior would have changed. That truth was now visible to everyone listening. Chloe Bennett finally stepped away from the reception desk, her voice quiet but steady. "Ms. Whitmore," she said carefully, "I am sorry for my silence earlier." Vivian turned toward her. Chloe continued, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. "I should have spoken up when the situation became inappropriate." Vivian observed her for a long moment before responding. "Silence in moments like that is not rare," she said gently. "It is learned." Chloe's expression tightened slightly at the implication. Not blame, understanding, but still accountability. Across the lobby, board members began exchanging subtle looks. The acquisition was no longer a procedural event. It was becoming a cultural audit in real time. Vivian finally turned toward the elevator bank. "Let us proceed upstairs," she said calmly. "There is work to be done." As she walked, the employees instinctively parted to create a clear path. Not because they were told to, but because they now understood who she was in a way that had nothing to do with title or wealth. It was presence. Damien followed a few steps behind, his posture no longer firm but carefully restrained, as if every movement now required reconsideration. The elevator doors opened quietly, revealing a sleek interior lined with brushed metal and soft lighting. Vivian stepped in first without hesitation. Charles Holloway entered beside her, followed by several board members who now looked significantly more serious than they had earlier that morning. Damien entered last. The doors closed smoothly, sealing the lobby outside. For a moment, there was only the soft hum of ascent. Vivian looked forward, her reflection faintly visible in the polished elevator doors. "Before the meeting begins," she said calmly, "there will be one immediate priority." Charles turned slightly toward her. "Of course." Vivian's voice remained steady. "We will review how leadership is reflected in daily behavior. Not policies, not statements. Behavior." No one spoke, because everyone understood exactly what she meant. The elevator continued upward through the glass tower of Whitmore Global, carrying with it not just executives and board members, but the beginning of a shift that would reach far beyond a single morning. The elevator ascended in complete silence, the soft hum of machinery the only sound accompanying the group as they moved upward through the glass tower of Whitmore Global. Floor numbers illuminated one by one above the doors, each level bringing them closer to the executive conference floor where the most important financial decision in the company's history was about to take place. Damian Mercer stood rigidly near the back of the elevator, his hands clasped in front of him in a posture that no longer reflected authority, but containment. Everything about him now felt restrained, as if he were carefully monitoring every breath he took. Across from him, Vivian Whitmore remained calm, her gaze directed forward, her expression unreadable but composed. Charles Holloway stood slightly beside her, reviewing notes on a slim digital tablet while occasionally glancing toward her for confirmation. The board members inside the elevator avoided unnecessary movement. No one spoke. The earlier energy of confidence and control had been replaced with something more fragile: awareness. The realization that what had just occurred in the lobby was not an isolated misunderstanding, but a reflection of something deeper within the organization itself. As the elevator neared the top floors, Vivian finally spoke without turning her head. "Tell me," she said softly, "how often do employees interact with leadership in this building?" The question seemed simple, but it carried weight. Damian hesitated before answering. "There are scheduled town halls and quarterly reviews," he said carefully. Vivian nodded slightly. "Scheduled," she repeated. The word lingered in the confined space. Charles glanced up from his tablet, but said nothing. The elevator chimed softly as it passed the 48th floor. Vivian continued, her tone still calm. "And outside of those schedules, how often do executives observe how people are treated in common spaces?" No immediate answer followed. Damian shifted slightly, searching for a response that would not deepen the discomfort already building inside him. "Operational reviews focus on performance metrics," he finally said. Vivian turned her head slightly toward him for the first time since entering the elevator. "Metrics," she repeated again, almost quietly. The elevator continued its ascent. At that moment, the board member standing closest to the control panel cleared his throat. "Ms. Whitmore," he said cautiously, "if there are cultural concerns within the organization, we are fully prepared to address them at the governance level." Vivian regarded him briefly. "Governance often arrives after behavior has already been normalized," she replied. The words were not accusatory, but they carried undeniable clarity. The elevator slowed. The soft chime indicated arrival at the executive conference level. The doors opened smoothly, revealing a long corridor lined with glass walls and modern art installations, leading toward the main boardroom. The lighting was warmer here, designed to feel more refined, more exclusive, more controlled. Yet the atmosphere that greeted them felt anything but controlled. Several executives were already standing outside the conference room doors, speaking in low voices. As soon as the elevator opened, their conversation stopped abruptly. One by one, they turned. Recognition spread quickly through the group. Vivian stepped out first. The hallway seemed to adjust around her presence, not physically, but perceptibly, as if the space itself acknowledged a shift in authority. Damian followed closely behind, his expression tight, his earlier confidence now completely absent. One of the senior executives approached cautiously. "Ms. Whitmore," he said respectfully, "we were just reviewing preliminary merger documents before your arrival." Vivian nodded once. "Good. Then you are prepared to discuss structure." The executive hesitated briefly before stepping aside. As Vivian walked toward the conference room doors, every person in the corridor instinctively made space. There was no announcement, no formal introduction, no dramatic declaration. Yet the recognition was immediate. She was not entering their space. They were entering hers. Damian watched this silently, a realization forming that had nothing to do with corporate hierarchy and everything to do with perception. Moments ago, he had dismissed her in the lobby without hesitation. Now the entire floor treated her presence as the center of gravity. As they reached the conference room entrance, Vivian paused briefly. She looked at the polished glass doors where the company's leadership awaited. Then she turned slightly toward Damien one last time. "What happens inside this room," she said calmly, "will not only determine the future of Whitmore Global. It will determine whether this company understands the difference between authority and respect." She did not wait for a response. The doors opened, and she stepped inside. The doors of the executive boardroom closed behind Vivian Whitmore with a soft, controlled sound that felt far heavier than its volume. Inside the room, the atmosphere shifted immediately. A long polished oak table stretched across the center, surrounded by high-level executives, board members, and legal advisors who had spent months preparing for this exact moment. Yet the preparation now felt incomplete, because no amount of forecasting had accounted for the reality walking into the room. Vivian stood at the head of the table without hesitation. There was no need for introduction. Everyone already knew who she was. Charles Holloway took his seat to her right, while quietly placing the final acquisition documents in front of her. Damien Mercer entered last, his steps slower now, his earlier confidence completely replaced by cautious awareness. He remained near the edge of the room, no longer in control of anything unfolding around him. Vivian looked around the table once, taking in every face. Then she spoke. "Before any signatures are placed today," she said calmly, "we will address something that happened downstairs." A few executives exchanged uncertain glances. One of them attempted a polite shift in tone. "Ms. Whitmore, the merger terms are fully prepared. Perhaps we should focus on final approval and financial alignment." Vivian turned her gaze toward him. "We will," she replied, "but not before understanding the environment this company has built." Silence followed immediately. Damien shifted slightly, tension tightening across his shoulders. Vivian continued, her voice steady but precise. "I arrived this morning without announcement. I was not accompanied by security. I did not wear indicators of status. And within minutes, I was dismissed from an executive space by someone who assumed I did not belong." Her eyes moved briefly across the table. That response was not about me. It was about conditioning. No one interrupted her. Not because they agreed, but because no one could confidently disagree. Charles Holloway observed quietly, knowing this moment was not legal procedure. It was cultural examination. Vivian placed both hands lightly on the table. "I want to be clear," she continued. "Whitmore Global will not be evaluated solely by financial performance moving forward. It will be evaluated by how it recognizes human value in ordinary situations." Damien finally spoke, his voice lower than before. "Ms. Whitmore, I understand your concern. But today's incident may have been an isolated misunderstanding under pressure." Vivian looked directly at him. The room tightened instantly. "It was not isolated," she said. "It was instinctive." The word landed heavily. One board member lowered his eyes toward the table's surface. Another leaned back slightly, processing what she was implying. Vivian continued without raising her voice. "When people feel comfortable dismissing others based on appearance, they are not reacting to stress. They are revealing habit." The word habit made several executives shift uncomfortably in their seats. Damien's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained silent. Vivian then gestured gently toward Charles. He activated a screen at the front of the room. Security footage from the lobby appeared silently. The moment played back without sound at first. Vivian standing calmly. Damien blocking her path. Employees watching. Smirks. Dismissive gestures. The footage was not exaggerated. It did not require interpretation. It simply existed. The room grew stiller with each passing second. Damien watched the screen without blinking. For the first time that morning, he saw himself from the outside. Charles paused the footage. Vivian spoke softly again. "This is not about punishment," she said. "It is about awareness." She looked around the table once more. Because companies do not fail in public announcements. They fail in small, repeated decisions that nobody corrects. A long silence followed. Then one of the senior board members spoke carefully. "What would you like us to do moving forward, Ms. Whitmore?" Vivian did not answer immediately. She looked at the table, then at the people around it, then at the paused image on the screen. Finally, she said, We begin by redefining what leadership behavior means inside this organization. Not in documents. In action. Damien slowly exhaled, the weight of the morning fully settling in now. Vivian closed the folder in front of her gently. We will proceed with the merger approval, she added calmly. But after today, Whitmore Global will not continue as it has before. No one argued. No one interrupted. And for the first time since the morning began, the silence in the room no longer felt like tension. It felt like recognition. The boardroom remained still long after Vivian Whitmore finished speaking. It was not the kind of silence born from confusion anymore, but from understanding that something permanent had shifted inside the room. The executives who once prepared for a routine acquisition approval now found themselves in a situation that demanded reflection rather than negotiation. Vivian sat calmly at the head of the table, her hands resting naturally, her expression steady but no longer distant. She was no longer evaluating a company on paper. She was evaluating the people who would define its future. Damian Mercer remained seated near the far end of the table, no longer attempting to recover his earlier authority. His posture had changed completely since the beginning of the meeting. Every word spoken in the room now weighed against what had happened in the lobby. He understood that no explanation he offered would erase what had already been seen. Charles Holloway gently closed the presentation screen and placed the acquisition file in front of Vivian again. "We are prepared to proceed whenever you are ready," he said respectfully. Vivian nodded slightly, but did not immediately respond. Instead, she looked around the room once more. "Before we continue," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I want every person in this room to understand something clearly." All movement stopped. Even the subtle shifting of chairs ceased. Vivian continued. What happened earlier downstairs was not a mistake in logistics. It was a reflection of how quickly people decide who deserves respect and who does not. A few executives lowered their eyes. One board member folded his hands together, visibly uncomfortable. Vivian's tone did not rise, yet every word carried weight. "This company will not change through policy documents alone," she said. "It will change through accountability in moments like the one that just occurred." Damien finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. "Ms. Whitmore, I take full responsibility for my actions this morning." Vivian turned her gaze toward him. There was no anger in her expression, only clarity. "Responsibility is not declared," she said gently. "It is demonstrated over time." Damien nodded slowly, absorbing the distinction without argument. Across the table, Chloe Bennett sat quietly, her hands resting still on her notebook. She had not spoken since the meeting began, but her awareness had deepened with every passing minute. She understood now that silence in critical moments carried consequences just as visible as actions. Vivian shifted slightly in her chair. "Going forward," she said, "there will be a formal review of internal conduct expectations across all departments. Not as a response to embarrassment, but as a standard of leadership." Charles Holloway made a small note on his tablet without interruption. The room remained attentive. Vivian continued. "Leadership is not defined by who can command attention in a meeting room. It is defined by how consistently respect is maintained when no one is being observed." The statement settled heavily over the table. No one attempted to interrupt. Vivian then closed the acquisition folder gently. "Now," she said, "we proceed with the merger approval." The tone had shifted. Not softened, not intensified, but clarified. This was no longer just a financial transaction. It was a transition of culture. Charles placed the final documents in front of her again. One by one, the board members prepared to sign. Damien watched quietly, no longer as a figure of authority, but as someone fully aware that his role within the organization would now be measured differently. Vivian took the pen and signed the first page without hesitation. The sound of ink meeting paper felt final, yet measured. One by one, the remaining signatures followed. As the last document was completed, Vivian set the pen down and looked at the room one final time. "This company has the potential to lead an entire industry," she said calmly. "But only if it remembers that leadership begins with how people are treated when there is nothing to gain." The board members nodded in quiet acknowledgement. Damien remained still, absorbing the weight of everything that had transpired since the morning began. Vivian stood slowly, signaling the conclusion of the meeting. There was no celebration, no applause, no dramatic conclusion. Only a quiet understanding shared among those present. As she left the boardroom, the atmosphere inside Whitmore Global felt different than it had just hours earlier. Not because the company had changed overnight, but because the people within it now understood that they were being observed in ways they had never considered before. And for the first time that day, respect inside the building no longer depended on appearance or assumption. It depended on awareness.